is that we learn to find contentment where we are. I don't think that means, and I think you can see in the scripture, that that's not saying that you don't strive for a better job if you want one. You don't strive for better conditions if you need those, or you don't get higher education, or you don't improve your situation where you can. But to be content in that process, to not be discontent, to not be ungrateful in what conditions that we are in. You know, God has placed each of us in a variety of life circumstances, and He wants us, He wants to use us right there in those circumstances.
Thank you.
I was surprised to see you able to get up.
I was
Very
watching.
impressive. My goodness.
It's
So-
a great effort.
So when you wrap up this passage, there's four things I think that you'll see, and they're in your notes. Again, if you want to draw out of this section of scripture, chapter 7, verses 10 through 24, that you wrap this up concerning marriage and divorce and remarriage. There are clearly some priorities that God has. As someone has rightly said, the secret of successful living, I think, is discerning God's priorities and determining to personally live by them. And I certainly would agree with that. I've shared with many of my grandchildren, particularly the boys, that are struggling to find out what is a man. And for me, it's just go to the Word of God. Find out what God requires of a man. And be that. Just be that. And I know that's simple to say. Not always that simple to do. But I think that's the challenge for each one of us. So as we pull out the priorities here, involves the permanence of marriage, particularly between believers. The permanence of marriage, I think you see that in verses 10 and 11. That is counterculture, but I think it is God's perfect design. Number two, God's priority in marriage involves problem solving. You know, when I used to do marriage counseling, and by the way, I don't do that anymore, but when it comes to marriage counseling, I want to get across that there will always be conflicts. I'll ask the young couple, are you going to have any problem? No, we love each other. There's not going to be any problem. And this may be a little crude for you, and I don't want to hurt your delicate ears, but I tell them that we normally just see Prince Charming and Maid Marian clipping off into the sunset on the white steed. And it doesn't show you over the hill there's a barn full of stuff. There are conflicts. So I think the major thing is to develop a conflict resolution process. How are we going to solve problems between us? The way Norma and I have worked it out is whatever she says is right. Most of the time. We have to develop communication skills, resolution, forgiveness, reconciliation. We've been asked a few times, how have we been able to stay married over 60 plus years? And Norma has come up with the right solution, and that is to have two good forgivers. You gotta work on forgiveness. You know, there will be conflict. How can there not be? Two different personalities coming in from two different sets of circumstances. There's got to be. You know? She won't watch the Redskins play, if they ever would. Thirdly, I think God's priority in marriage involves the priority of witness, of spiritual impact, particularly where there's a believer and an unbeliever in the family. There is a witnessing process, not getting up behind a pulpit and preaching. When Norma got saved, she got saved a year before I did. And for the first 6 months of that year, she drove me absolutely nuts. She would leave tracts on my pillow. She would leave Bible open to John 3:16. All of this kind of stuff. And that didn't work. Until some faithful woman told her to stop that preaching and pray and live a godly life in front of me, which worked. Because God then convicted me, rather than my convicting that she was nuts.
Amen.
Well, I mean, she was giving my $5 a week to that preacher down at that church. For heaven's sake. Working on reconciliation, a priority of witness. I think God's priority in everyday living is that of contentment. Not necessarily not striving for gain, for a change of circumstances, but being content with where you are, when you are, and where you are. Learning what it means, not necessarily to pursue necessarily happiness and comfort, but to learn what it means to die to one's self. And learn to be content in whatever situation God has placed you. So remember, this life that we live is really preparation for the one to come. It's just preparation. We're in school while we're here. All right?